Welcome back, everyone, to the College Match podcast, where we're matching incredible students to great colleges, one story at a time. It has been an extremely eventful last few months. As some of you may know, I'm one of the college counselors for College Match. And since our last episode aired, I took a short break from podcasting to support my students on their college application journey. Later on in the podcast, you'll hear some exciting updates as to where our students are now being accepted. And in addition to completing a very busy application season, we also celebrated the 80th birthday of our founder, Harley Frankel, whose legacy and impact has reached thousands of students across Los Angeles. So to kick off season 2, I wanted to introduce you to that man, the man who started it all, Harley Frankel. On today's episode, I'll be taking you through his own journey, which is very similar to the students we support every year. His story is not just inspirational, but so is the story behind what has now become College Match Los Angeles. And don't forget to tune in to season 1, where I introduce you to 7 incredible students making an impact in their community. Since then, those students have been accepted to Occidental, UCLA, Middlebury, USC, Washington University, Caltech, and so many more colleges across the nation. As I mentioned earlier, it's been an exciting last few months. So season 2 is not just going to bring you 7 more incredible stories from our current students, but it's also going to introduce you little by little as to how College Match is doing now during the pandemic and some of the ways that we have pivoted as an organization to support our students. So with that, to all the dreamers, believers, and achievers, teachers, educators, and supporters, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started with today's episode. On February 2nd, 1941, Harley Frankel was born. When World War II broke out, Harley's father was sent to the South Pacific to join the Army. So at that time, Harley and his mom were sent to live with his grandparents. Growing up, Harley went to public school in Richmond, Virginia. When he wasn't in school, he was either playing competitive tennis or helping his parents at their clothing store, Eagle Pants Shop. I was lucky enough to meet Harley over 10 years ago through a network called SoCalCan, which stands for the Southern California College Access Network. There, he became a mentor of mine as I was starting a college access program at the nonprofit organization I was working at the time. Not only did he eventually become my boss, but Harley has been a mentor of mine in the world of college access ever since. Of course, I've known you for several years now, at least 10 years. In fact, I just realized, I don't know if you know, but SoCalCan is celebrating their 15th anniversary.
I see that. It looks cool. Yeah, it's a good job.
Yeah, so I take it back to that kind of first meeting that we had. But before I even met you, Harley, I had no idea all of the stuff that you had done before College Match. So can you just do us a favor and share a little bit about your experience? Well, I mean, really how education became a part of your life.
Yeah, my grandparents came here at the turn of the 20th century, and they just were hardworking people. My grandfather, believe it or not, on my mother's side, had been ordained to be a rabbi in the old country, but here he couldn't be a rabbi, so he decided to be a tailor, and he owned a little tailor shop. Anyway, long story short, I grew up in a really nice, supportive family, very similar to a lot of Latino families that we have here. First generation immigrant families, that kind of thing. And they are just lovely people, but I never forgot my mom. We had very little money. But my mom basically always used to put money on Sabbath Eve, Friday night, into a little box. And, and she said to me all the time, we're poor, but there are a lot of people who are much more poor than we are, and we got to help out everybody. And it sort of stuck with me. I grew up in the South. And let me put it this way, I think there were 4 of us who left the state to go to college. Everyone else either didn't go to college or went to college inside the state. And they were okay colleges, but not not fabulous colleges for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So then
and
what do you think was that like inspiration for you, that drive to help you? That reminds me of my mom's story. You know, she grew up in a little tiny town in northern New Mexico, but she always knew she wanted to leave, you know, where
well,
everyone else stayed.
I think, I think it's I'm not sure, but I think it might be the Jewish tradition. Jews were always discriminated against all the way through. And the one thing that kept them together was studying what's called the Talmud, which is Jewish law. And the most prized people in the communities were always the people who studied so well, they became rabbis and everybody, and I suspect it's that, but I really have never thought about it. It's a good question, Andrea. I don't really know. I sort of gravitated to education because I love it.
When he graduated high school, Harley was inspired to forge a path for his family by being the first one to go to college. He was accepted into Columbia University, where he studied political science and applied mathematics, and was the captain of the tennis team, as well as graduated the top of his class.
I was the first in my family to go to college. I was lucky to get into some really good schools. I mean, I didn't know anything, and I didn't have any help. And I'll tell you how I got to Columbia. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. My nice Jewish family, they wanted me to stay at home and go to a place called the Medical College of Virginia, which I learned to be a pharmacist because during the Depression, everybody still needed pharmacists, and that's what they cared about. It was security. And I didn't want to do that. And I couldn't figure out how to convince them to let me go do something else until I realized that my father was from New York, and that if I went to college in New York, quote unquote, family would still take care of me. And so I applied to Columbia just for that reason. And I hadn't done any SAT prep or anything. And I got in. I think I got in on geographical distribution because most of the kids at Columbia in those days were from New York City, and there weren't very many of us in the South. And that's what happened. I did it because I was the kind of kid who would never say no to my family.
Since your parents didn't go to college, do you recall kind of what their contribution was towards your college process? Were they able to help or support, or what did they tell you along that process?
Really good question. They had enough money to help me halfway through 1 year. I didn't get any financial aid initially. Helped me through 1 year, and that's all they had. And this summer drives my son crazy. There's a tournament for high school juniors, of high school for 18 and under around the country in tennis, in a place called Kalamazoo. I won the city championship, and therefore the Chamber of Commerce gave me a free trip all the way to Kalamazoo pay for it. My family said to me, look, it's great, but you can't go. You got to work this summer to help pay your way through college. So I did. I was a dutiful boy. I would never said no to my parents. But anyway, and then I worked every summer, and I worked on campus with jobs. And then, to be honest, I'd noticed a little paragraph in the college handbook, whatever it's called, that said if you do good grades and you don't have a scholarship, you can earn one. So I went to the financial aid guy 1 year, and I said, look, after my freshman year, I said, look, this thing says that. He says, look, we don't have any more money. We've given it all out. And I said, well, it says so in the catalog. And he said, if you can show it to me, I'll give you a scholarship. And I showed it to him. And I got us basically enough to cover what my parents had covered the first year. And then I still had to work every summer. I ended up working as a waiter in the mountains up in New York State, and worked my way through college. And basically, that's what I did. It wasn't hard. I mean, you just do those things. So I went to Columbia determined to be an engineer. That was good. What I was going to do. I ended up in a really nice fraternity with a bunch of really nice guys. Still in touch with some of them. And 1 year, one of the guys, really smart guy, said to me, look, I'm taking this government course, and you have an open period. Why don't you take it also and, join me in this government course? So I did. And I fell in love with public policy and government and that kind of thing. And I sort of, by this time, I was really far along on the engineering thing, but I sort of stayed an extra year at Columbia and got 2 degrees. One was political science and one was in engineering, which I never used again. my going to Harvard Business School was just a fluke. I didn't know what I wanted to do after graduation. It's a true story. And I had a friend who thought Harvard Business School was the be all and end all. And I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I didn't feel like going on to get a PhD or anything. He said, why don't you go to Harvard Business School a couple of years and you'll have a really good degree? I said, okay, I'll apply. It's the only school I applied to. I didn't, you know, somehow I got in, and, you know, that's, yeah. And everybody there was, you know, all these people who wanted to go to Wall Street. You know, in those days, going to Wall Street was the way to make it big. And I suspect that half my class went into finance and everything.
Wow.
They're all good people, but they basically spent their life making money and, you know, and giving it out in different ways to different folks. But, you know, but they were focused on making a lot of money. And to me, that wasn't as important as having an impact and having jobs that really made me feel good.
You actually mentioned two things that I think are so relevant in our students' life right now. One is the advocacy piece. You found when you went to that financial aid officer, it's almost like you had to take, you know, reins in your own hands and say, this is my education, so I'm going to advocate. And and then the second one was being open to change, you know, and exploring that, okay, maybe I go in as one thing, but there are so many more things that college is going to provide. After Harley earned his MBA at Harvard, he settled in Washington, D.C., where he met his wife of 45 years, Wendy. I'll never forget the day Harley told me that he was married beside the tidal basin at the Jefferson Memorial. We had just finished touring colleges with 35 college match students and were sightseeing at some of DC's most iconic sites. Harley made it a point to take us all to the exact location he said I do to the love of his life. It was such a special moment for me and all the students who were there to hear Harley's love story and to hear about the incredible impact he made in the city we were exploring. Harley's career was devoted to public service. He served as the director of the National Head Start program, executive assistant to the U.S. Commissioner of Education, deputy director at the White House Personnel Office, state budget director of Colorado, senior executive of the Children's Defense Fund. He also served as deputy commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and developed the forerunner of the Pell Grant financial aid program, impacting the lives of millions.
I ran the National Head Start program for 4 years.
Yeah.
And that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. And one of the things is Head Start, people kept trying to, Head Start was much more than an educational program. It had healthcare, dental health, mental health. And everyone tried to, and it was a community-based program. It went directly to the local community. While I was in Washington, there were 3 different attempts to change Head Start in a way that all the people, including me, who were advocates of Head Start, thought would really hurt the program and turn it into either a program run by governors. They would take it out of the local communities. It was African-American parents who were running programs in Mississippi. Well, if you remember the way the power structure thought about African-American people in those days, they didn't like that. Let's put it this way. We managed to fight off all 3 of the attempts. One was to give it to the governors. One was to put it in the Department of Education, which everybody wanted except the Head Start community. We fought that one for 6 months and we won. We got 50,000 letters from Head Start families, handwritten, those were before email or anything, and bombarded the Congress with it. We brought in 2 busloads of African-American parents to sit in the offices of the people in the Senate who were putting Head Start in the program. Anyway, we won that one. And then the last one, which I was most proud of that one, but the last one was a good right when I was in the White House at the end of the decade, and President Carter, who was my president, got beat by a guy named Ronald Reagan that California foisted upon us. And and I had a relationship with a guy at OMB who was in charge of all human services. But he called me one day and said, look, I got to tell you, these Reagan people are all over here now. It was during the transition. And he said, we've got, you're going to be really disappointed. They're talking about huge cuts in all human services programs, including Head Start. So I found a way to get the Reagan people to agree never to cut Head Start for 8 years, and they never did. It's the only human service program that was never cut. That's what we did in those days in Washington. We worked with Democrats and Republicans. There were a lot of good Republicans as well as Democrats, and I know that's hard these days to division, but it's true. And we were advocates. I mean, we were fighting for things that were really important, but it never happened before.
Wow.
And I came, in the sort of on the late side, but the people who did the Great Society were really, really committed, good people.
During his time in DC, Harley was exposed to the major disparities of our national education program.
There was a wonderful man named Sam Halperin who created an organization called the Educational Staff Seminar. And he had been the guy who got a lot of the Great Society stuff through Congress. He was the legislative person for the Office of Education in those days. So he got through a lot of stuff. He decided to take people like me who was sort of capable but not very knowledgeable and take us around the country to see various things. He even took us to various, we went to a bunch of other countries too. We went to Japan together. I went to China. I mean, we did a lot of stuff. But one time we went to 4 black colleges, and there were 2 that were considered middle-class black colleges and 2 that were lower-class black colleges. Well, the 4th one was Tennessee State in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a lower-class black college. And all they did with us on all 4 trips was to put us in a conference room with a bunch of people and talk. And I sort of, being a little bit of a maverick, I sort of excused myself. And there were lots of us. There were like 20 people around the table, and went out into the schoolyard and on campus and started talking to kids. Various. Wow. And this is a true story. All these kids were bright and hardworking and sort of had a great ambition, and they said they're all freshmen and they're only going to come for 1 year because the school didn't have enough money to give them 4 years worth of financial aid. But the school decided that rather have more kids have 1 year than one kid at 4 years. So I said, that's crazy. There's tons of financial aid money at the Office of Education, which there was. So I came back and got permission to start a task force to take a look at what was going on. And the Office of Education was giving the money all to big, prestigious universities and very little to black colleges and community colleges, which was partly the way the Great Society was in those days. They were trying to get political points, and they thought that was the best way to get. Anyway, long story short, we changed the system. It took 1.5 years. We changed the system so that money would go out in direct proportion to the number of low-income kids you have in your percentage of low-income kids you have on your campus. And that led me later on to get involved with the Pell Grant program. Well, I had nothing to do with setting it up. Some very smart people who set it up, and I was just sort of on the fringes. So I kept getting very close to it, and it passed the Senate easily. Pell was the chairman of the committee, and it wasn't named after him then. He named it after 4 years later. But he passed it in the Senate by 85-10. It was an easy pass. In the House, the Democrats who were in control of the House were really angry at Nixon, who was the president then, because he had vetoed 2 educational appropriations bills. He had vetoed the Child Development Act, which I had worked on actually. And they were angry. They weren't going to give him a victory. They were going to deny him Pell Grants as a way of giving him a victory. The other thing that was going on is that there's a group of prestigious universities in Washington. I don't know if they still are, but it's called One DuPont Circle. They have a lobby. And they lobby for the Ivies and Stanford and Michigan State and all those big schools. And they're very influential with the Democrats in those days. So the Democrats, and they didn't like the bill because the bill basically took money out of their hands and gave it to students, gave it to low-income students. They had all the discretion before that. So they were telling the House Democrats it's a horrible, horrible bill. Don't vote for it. Anyway, long story short, it weaved its way through the House, and basically the last time it could have passed was right after spring break in 1974.
After a straw vote right before spring break that resulted in 15 Democrats against 12 Republicans, Harley worked with a few of his closest connections to help convince the outlier Democrats to change their votes. As a result, he and a close friend were able to convince a key Democrat, the gentleman who sponsored the Child Development Bill, and whom he also worked with, to change his vote. In the end, the Pell Grant was passed 14-13, thanks to Harley's passion and drive. After years of advocating for low-income students' rights on Capitol Hill, Harley made his way to Los Angeles, where he started roots with his family and Wendy. It was here in LA almost 20 years ago that Harley's vision for College Match was born. You know, Harley, you've laid a really awesome foundation for us to tell us, well, you know, really just to showcase your time in Washington and truly the major impact you made nationally. But then College Match comes about. Can you share a little bit more about what inspired you to start it?
We'd been living out here, God, about 15 years, and I had worked primarily in professional sports. Was the GM of the Portland Trail Blazers and helped start Major League Soccer and that kind of thing. And, you know, I loved it, but I was sort of missing all the stuff in Washington and everything. Mm-hmm. And what happened was my wife and I, Wendy, wonderful, we did everything that crazy upper middle class parents do to help kids get into college. David came along, the oldest, and he went to Harvard Westlake. He wanted to go. It was a great school, probably the best school in California, or one of them. Anyway, and they teach you how to do college admissions. They take the parents and, and they do all these great things for the kids. They got great influence with the admissions offices and that kind of thing. I thought, I used to care about kids who were like Head Start kids and low income kids in Pell Grants. Why not start a program for the really smart low income kids around LA and inner city schools and give them everything that we gave our son? Well, the important thing about College Match is why we're such a better program. That's a lot, but every college access program is doing God's work as far as I'm concerned. But the important thing is we set a very high standard. We decided that these kids around LA, the brightest that we could find, the most capable we could find, were just as good as the kids who went to Harvard Westlake and got into these great schools. And we're going to give them everything that those kids got at the same level. So that meant East Coast trips to all the colleges, which almost no one did the way we've done it. And after a while, it meant Midwestern schools and, of course, California schools. So we spent a fortune, a large amount of money on the trips. We finally ended up taking like 100 and like 4 different buses, 4 different trips, and as you know, 192 kids a year and that kind of thing. Anyway, but it became, I'm pretty sure College Match does more college site visits than any college access program in the country. I'm virtually certain of that. But we also want to give them great SAT prep, because it's not enough just to have good grades and visit the college. You got to be able to put the numbers down there for colleges to take you. And instead of going the normal route, which is to hire someone who was at one of the factories, I used to call them, like review and everything, we decided to hire people who could teach them one-on-one, or one on 20, but people who are making their living off of private school kids, because they had higher standards, they were really good. And so we ended up hiring people who were really, really good SAT instructors. And so our students got 2 things that most programs don't give you. One is trips all over the country, and 2, very high caliber SAT prep.
That makes sense. And one of the things that I also think you've done phenomenally was develop partnerships with high schools. As we know in LA, they're overrun, overpopulated. Counselors, the ratio to student to counselor is just outrageous. And so you were able to not just sell to funders, but to high schools the benefit of our program.
And that was, it started slowly. We started with 3 high schools, and the next year we got a 4th one, a charter school in Englewood. It was our 4th.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start producing results, word of mouth gets around. So we just had to produce the results the first couple of years, and boy, the grapevine around LA among high school,
Right. Network.
you
The
know,
network is powerful.
we didn't have to do anything. We sort of got besieged after a while. And then, I didn't want to take on too much at first because I wasn't sure I could raise the money and we didn't have the infrastructure. And we got a really good break when a group of upper middle class West LA women, basically, who had done very well in their careers, had raised their own kids, had helped their kids get through college. They came to volunteer. And so all of a sudden we had this incredibly capable group of people. They really are a great group, as you know. And it didn't cost us very much. We had a great asset. And, long story short, then we started really expanding quickly. We started doing 2 extra schools a year at least, and sometimes more. A lot of schools were yearning to be part of College Match, and we tried our best to keep up with the demand. And it sort of grew by leaps and bounds after a while.
Harley started College Match with 33 juniors and 1 senior from Franklin High School named Erica Andraca, who made a lasting impact not just on Harley, but on the College Match program as a whole. Her journey with College Match laid a powerful foundation for future generations of students.
She was everything: president of schools, president of student body, head of the environmental club, head of the Latino club, head of the drama club. Basically, she did everything, and she was extraordinary. And she was a senior, and she was undocumented. And they had no idea what to. They begged me to take her, and I didn't want to originally because I only wanted juniors. We had a 2-year program, but she was so amazing that we did, and she turned out to be an incredible kid. And she got to a good school. She graduated with honors. Wendy and I went to her graduation.
Wow.
And then she went on to other things. And we spent probably, after she graduated, we probably spent 10 years helping her get her citizenship, which she now has.
Wow.
As the first student, I was accompanying Harley to conferences, for college counselors. And as he was building those connections, and he did an incredible job. I graduated in 2004, and I was undocumented at the time. And Harley just fought for me. He was determined to do that. He's like, not only are you going to get into college, you're going to get into a top tier school.
That's so special. And I know you also have many stories of students that you've just seen along the way and seen their transition. Do you have any other stories of students that you just feel just make this job all worthwhile? I'm sure there are hundreds.
Without naming names, there was one young man. There are a lot, but there was one young man who's African American. He was in the deepest part of Watts. He read more in a year than I read in a decade, and he was very articulate. So we go through the process. He goes on an East Coast trip. He falls in love with Yale. He wants to go to Yale. Takes the SAT the first time and had a 710 in English, a 700 in writing, and a 330 in math. So I look at his transcript. He's all A's in math. So I talked to his counselor and said, what the heck is going on here? She said, sit down, Harley. Let me explain something to you. We're in a very dangerous neighborhood. Math teachers don't want to come here, and they get to choose because LAUSD doesn't have enough math teachers. He said he's been taught for 3 years math by either former English teachers or phys ed teachers. And he basically had never learned math. Long story short, I hired a woman who had gone to Yale, and who's in town getting her PhD. And she went 3 days a week to tutor him in math. And I called the Yale guy and I said, what do we have to do to get him in? And the Yale guy said, got to give him at least 550. I can't get him in otherwise. Well, we got him to a 510 and they admitted him. He graduated. He did very well at Yale. Then he got a full ride at Berkeley Law, which is very rare for a law school student. Joined a law firm, really prestigious law firm, and spent about 3 or 4 years there as an associate, and then left because he wanted to do other things. He then got 2 federal clerkships. In between, he got a Fulbright to Africa to teach English, and now he's back in the Bay Area, essentially with another law firm, And that was one of the stories that I remember.
Before I was a Berkeley Law trained lawyer or a Yale College alum, I was just a poor Black kid in Watts. Many of our teachers had low expectations of us and wrote us off, but luckily for me, Harley and College Match had a different future in mind. Harley knew that there were potential doctors and lawyers, engineers and teachers in poverty-stricken environments such as Watts. He knew that I and my Black and brown peers were not intellectually deficient or lost causes. Harley understood that our problem was not a lack of talent, but lack of resources. I remember when I scored poorly on the quantitative reasoning portion of the SAT, College Match hired me a Yale-educated private tutor so that one section of the SAT would not take an otherwise strong college application. Thanks to College Match, when I applied to 20 universities, I got accepted to 19 of them and waitlisted at one. One thing I remember distinctly is when I opened my Yale letter of acceptance, the Dean of Admission literally wrote, "Congrats, Harley Frankel and College Match are proud of you." Harley looked at us without pity or patronization. He viewed us with hope, potential, and promise. It would not be hyperbole to say, Harley changed the course of my life. I am not supposed to be here statistically, but I thank God that he brought Harley into my life. I know that anything I accomplish in my career will be an extension of Harley's legacy.
That's one of my pleasures, one of my joys of this job. I didn't know anything about Latino families and other immigrant families, some Asian ones, and I got to know them, and I realized that they were just so wonderful. They love their kids. They'll do anything for their kids. They worked hard. They came to the United States so that their kids would have better opportunities. They cared about religion. They cared about family. They had extended families that are like 12, 14 people living in one apartment or two apartments or whatever. And they all took care of each other. And very much exactly what Jewish immigrant families did in the early 1900s when they came to the United States. It just reminded me so much of my grandparents and parents. And I found it to be one of the great joys of this job because these families are just so wonderful. I see this stuff on politics about immigration and everything, and it kills me because if they got to know these people, they would be so supportive because these are wonderful people. It's what America's all about. But we got a group of people in this country who, anyway.
Actually that gets me a little emotional because of this idea that there's so many more similarities than differences that we all have. But
that's right. That's
for some reason, then there's this emphasis on what makes us different as opposed to.
Exactly. And, we're 99% similar. Most people care about, working hard, making a living, loving, having kids, loving them and helping them get to the next, level, whatever it is. And everybody in America, cares about that. Very few people don't. And we're all very similar. We really are.
One thing that Harley did that makes College Match stand out from the rest is he hired some of the best and most dedicated SAT teachers in Los Angeles. Not only do they truly care about what they do, but they care about creating personal connections with each of the students they work with. Our teachers want our students to know they are much more than a standardized exam score. During our interview, Harley highlights a prime example of this when he recalls a memory with one of our SAT teachers, Bandy.
One example that I'll never forget, we had a group of kids at Garfield High School who had to come to school on Saturday morning because of some rule they had or something. And she was teaching that class. So she would teach the class at Bell until 12 o'clock. Then she and I would get into a car and drive over to Garfield, and she would teach another class to these kids. We take them to lunch in the back of a Burger King, and we set up tables, and she would give them SAT prep. It was like maybe 8 of them or so, and she spent 6 hours that day doing SAT prep. And I just ate burgers at bed. But she was just amazing, and she volunteered to do that because she didn't want the kids to miss classes and stuff.
Oh my gosh, Harley. I mean, and that's just to paint a picture of across the board, the commitment that all of our SRT teachers have and getting to know them.
Got a great group.
Well, I think that's the beauty, though, Harley, of another piece to the college match puzzle is the fact that we're not just about access, but we're about success. And so I think the students now see their college counselors, us as staff, as people that they can come to when they do have hurdles, when they do have obstacles.
That's right. And the people they're closest with is the college counselor that they had,
Mm-hmm.
and they call them. They're encouraged to call them, and they do if they have a problem.
But I will say one of my mottos, and I think you've heard me say this before, is that I believe people go to people, not places, and that they find their person, they find their advocate and their ally, and wherever they are.
Good point. I never thought of it that way. You're right. Absolutely.
So you can have college centers all over campus if you wanted to, but if there's not a person in that college center that the students feel connected to or comfortable going to, they'll be empty centers,
Really true. I tell you, sometimes we've had kids have had problems, and we call the person in the admissions office who worked with us to get them in, and then they help solve the problems because they care about our students also.
Since it started, College Match has produced some phenomenal results in college access for low-income and first-generation students.
The great statistic, which we talk about, is 70% get into top 25 schools, 95% of top 50 schools, and 95% graduate from college. And the national average for low-income kids graduation rate is 16%. So it's a huge difference. And it's because our counselors and everybody work really hard to help these kids, even when they're in college, and we give them scholarships, and we're there to solve problems, and we basically help them get through. But most of them don't need help. Once they graduate and go to college, they're on their own. They do pretty well because they're really very capable young people. They really are.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, College Match has changed to primarily virtual programming. In addition, Harley retired on February 2nd, 2021, which means College Match has made some major adjustments in a year's time. However, everything we do continues to be inspired by the core values Harley started College Match with: exposure to some of the best private liberal arts colleges in the nation, access to quality SAT prep, and support to and through college. But just speaking of the future now, because there are so much has changed and pivoted in the last year because of COVID-19.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of envision College Match anywhere in the next 2 years during pandemic, where would that be?
I really haven't given it much thought, but Erica is doing a fabulous job in running the program, and I'm sure she and you and others have talked a lot about this. I think that just go ahead and keep doing it, even though it's remote, as much as you can, and hope that by next school year the kids will be back in school, and we can do SAT classes and everything. But we've been carrying on all along, with program, even though it's a big pandemic. And so I mean, the early decision stuff that came in the fall for this current senior class was pretty good. I don't know. I guess in April we'll find out how well. March and April find out how well they've done overall. But I suspect pretty well.
As of right now, 16 College Match students have committed early to colleges such as Dartmouth, MIT, Brown, Bowdoin, Johns Hopkins, Swarthmore, Carnegie Mellon, and many more. In just a week's time, we'll know the admissions results for all 181 seniors in the class of 2021. This is something that I like to do with the students when I'm interviewing them in the podcast. But if you were answering these questions, Harley, how would you respond? The first one is, if you were to go back to your 18-year-old self and knowing what you know now, about college and about the process, what type of advice would you give yourself?
That's really a good question. I don't believe a 17-year-old, certainly I wasn't able to really know what you want to do with the rest of your life at that stage. What you want to do is get the broadest education you can get, to be a generalist so you can do a lot of stuff. Now, not everybody at College Match does that. Some kids become engineers, some kids do computer science, but an awful lot of our students take the best education they can get and parlay it later in life and into lots of opportunities. Because you get you really get to be almost, you can do almost anything. I mean, I'm a nut. I mean, I worked in Indian affairs. I worked in professional sports. I worked in soccer. I worked in education. I was state budget director for a couple of years in Colorado. I mean, and the education allows me to do all this stuff. So I'm a big believer in it.
Yes. Very good. And that's definitely one of the things that we harp on our students, just to be open-minded and to.
That's right. And to let the opportunity, let them come to you, they will. If you get a good education, they will.
What legacy do you want to leave behind in your family and in this space in College Match?
Well, I've got a wonderful wife. I'm very lucky. We've been married over 45 years. I still don't know why she married me, but I'm glad she did. And we have 2 wonderful kids. And my daughter just had a baby 10 months ago, and the kid's adorable, and we love that.
So you have a blanket behind you, and I want to emphasize that because that. Can you share a little bit about that and what this year brought? Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. So this is a blanket of college shirts that was designed and created by one of our alumni and our students, our alumni and her mom.
It's a great blanket. I love it. I sleep under it every night. It's just wonderful. I mean, it's a really nice gift, and it's got all these colleges on it, T-shirts and everything. So I love it. It couldn't have picked anything better for me. It's perfect.
Perfect. And so, one of the reasons that we did that is it was your retirement year this year. We celebrated your birthday on the same day. But I do think that you literally created a legacy for not just something that you've created, but for the students. Before we leave today, is there any kind of last message that you would want to leave for the students as they?
Just what I said before is that they're going to get great education, and they deserve it, and they're capable, and to have the confidence to go forward and do really good things. And I really think that's the case. We have very, very capable people, and they're getting great education, and they're learning a lot about what's out there in the real world, and they're realizing that they're as good as anybody else. They really are. It's like family,
You said it. It's like family. That's a beautiful way to end our podcast, the College Match family, which is something we just onboarded our newest juniors into our family last week.
Good.
So we'll see where they head off, and then
I've still got all these fist guides in my garage.
Definitely, again, the legacy you're leaving behind. And an incredible legacy that is. What a perfect way to start season 2 of a podcast meant to highlight some incredible stories in Los Angeles. And don't forget to subscribe to the College Match podcast, because in a few weeks, you'll be introduced to one of our students who was admitted early to Dartmouth. You don't want to miss her powerful story. See you next time.
Being part of College Match was one of the most consequential events in my life.
I sincerely don't believe I knew enough about the college admissions process to be a competitive applicant without College Match.
All of a sudden it wasn't like, oh yeah, one day, someday in the future, I will go to a college. Now it was like, no, we're actually going to get you to college. So here are the steps. Harley the superhero in my eyes. He has turned what is a desire to help someone into helping, thousands of students. Not only did he say, okay, I got my college education, Columbia graduate, amazing school. But he said, okay, I'm taking what I learned and I'm turning around, and I'm not just going to pull one person up. I'm going to build the village to come and support a bunch of other students.
Harley has spent decades of his life empowering the people around him and setting up generations of leaders. And in as much that I want to tell you what the legacy is going to be, we're going to be seeing it 5, 10, 15, 30 years down the road. These are the people that are going to be ruling the world tomorrow. So I have no idea what his legacy is going to be, but I guarantee you anything you think it's going to be, it's much larger than that.
When I see Harley interact with students, when I see the way he makes business decisions and organizations decisions, I know that his values are upfront. He's a genuine person, he's authentic, and that's how he leads all aspects of his life.
Could never have imagined in a million years that we'd be celebrating today all the enormous contributions that College Match has made. I can say I've seen the joy that it brings Harley every single day. So in a way, he's the lucky one.
I'm Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I'm so proud to join you in offering my congratulations to Harley Frankel on his retirement. Harley, 17 years ago, when you came out of retirement, you inspired students and families and educators through your leadership, your compassion, and your drive for equity and inclusion. The qualities that make College Match such a remarkable place to learn, explore, and grow, they are mirrored in you. And you understand that our kids are not just students, they are leaders and young entrepreneurs and community organizers. They are sons and daughters, big brothers and sisters, sounding boards and confidants to their friends. But most importantly, they are the future. And to help them succeed, we need to look at the entire picture, have a way to bring all of our ideas and resources to bear. So thank you, Harley, for showing us through your example and your actions the love and dedication that every child needs to succeed.
Critical. There's an added value that these students add to their universities and to the world, right? They bring a very unique perspective that they carry into their professional lives. You know, for folks who go into policy work, it's going to shape policy based on their perspective, which is very unique.
Their investment and effort does not only affect the student, but entire communities that support them.
They inspire students that come from underserved communities to believe that they can dream big.
People probably know SAT scores are nearly perfectly correlated with a student's household income, thereby creating a barrier for low-income students that don't have access to top tutors, the best test prep, extra exam attempts, all the things that come with extra resources.
It's nearly impossible for students in my community to reach out to doctor uncles or engineering cousins, because those are just not the circles that are available to us, or names that you can reach out and talk to about things that seemed inaccessible.
When I was introduced to it, it was the first time that somebody really understood what it means to be a first-generation student. My parents were learning the education system with me. So as much as I knew, my parents knew. College Match said, you know what, we're opening your doors, we're opening up your horizons, we're going to take you farther than you could ever think you could go. And that's why College Match is incredibly important to my life and to the lives of the thousands of students that they've helped.
College Match has drastically changed my course in life, and I'll always be grateful for that. Thanks, Harley.